Hi, I'm Margaret, and I need to tell you about the day I discovered my daughter's true feelings about our living arrangement. I was 71 years old, sitting in my sunroom reading when I overheard Emma say something that shattered my heart completely. Mom's been living here for 2 years now, and honestly, I can't take it anymore. She's driving me insane with her constant presence, and we can't afford to keep maintaining two households forever. I wish she'd just move into assisted living already so David and I could have our privacy back. Those were the words that changed everything. Words spoken by my own daughter. About me, the woman who had been paying half of all her household expenses for the past 2 years. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Margaret Chen, and I'm 71 years old. I live in Riverside, California, where I moved in with my daughter Emma and her husband David 2 years ago after my husband Robert passed away from complications related to diabetes. Robert and I had been married for 48 years when he died, and losing him felt like losing half of myself. We'd built a beautiful life together, raised our only child Emma, and saved diligently for our retirement years. When Robert passed, I inherited a substantial estate. Between his life insurance policy, our joint savings account, his pension fund, and the sale of our family home in San Diego, I found myself with nearly $800,000 in liquid assets. It was more money than I'd ever imagined having, but it felt meaningless without Robert there to share our golden years. Emma seemed genuinely concerned about my emotional well-being during those first few months of grief. She'd call me every day, drive down from Riverside on weekends to check on me, and constantly worried about me living alone in our big house filled with memories. 6 months after Robert's funeral, Emma approached me with what seemed like a caring suggestion. "Mom, David and I have been talking, and we really think you shouldn't be living alone right now. You're still grieving, and that house is so big and empty. Why don't you come stay with us for a while? You could have the entire master suite upstairs, your own bathroom, and plenty of space for your things. We just want to make sure you're okay and not isolated during this difficult time." The offer touched my heart. Emma had always been a thoughtful daughter, and the idea of being closer to family during my grief felt comforting. I knew that Emma and David had been struggling financially. David worked as a middle school teacher, and Emma was a part-time graphic designer, working mostly freelance projects. They'd bought their house in Riverside 5 years earlier, stretching their budget to afford the mortgage payments, and I knew money was always tight for them. When I agreed to move in temporarily, I insisted on contributing to the household expenses. Emma initially protested, saying they just wanted to help me through my grief, but I was firm about this. I couldn't live in someone else's home without paying my fair share, especially when I knew they were struggling financially. We agreed that I would contribute $2,500 per month to cover my portion of the mortgage, utilities, groceries, and household expenses. This amount represented roughly half of their monthly living costs, and I could see the relief in both Emma and David's eyes when we settled on this arrangement. What was supposed to be a temporary stay gradually became permanent. After 6 months, Emma suggested I might want to stay longer since I seemed to be adjusting well to the living arrangement. The house was certainly large enough, with the upstairs master suite giving me plenty of privacy and space for my furniture and personal belongings. I had my own sitting area, a walk-in closet, and a beautiful view of their backyard garden from my bedroom windows. I continued paying my monthly contribution religiously, never missing a payment, never complaining about the amount. In fact, after the first year, I voluntarily increased my contribution to $3,000 per month because I noticed their property taxes had gone up and I wanted to make sure I was covering my fair share. I also frequently paid for groceries, household supplies, and various home improvements without being asked. When their air conditioning unit needed replacement, I quietly paid the $4,000 bill. When David's car needed major repairs, I covered the $2,800 cost without hesitation. I thought we had developed a comfortable routine. I maintained my independence by driving myself to my book club meetings, my weekly volunteer work at the local literacy center, and my regular medical appointments. I kept my own social calendar and tried to stay out of Emma and David's way when they wanted couple time. I cooked dinner for the family twice a week, giving Emma a break from meal preparation, and I helped with household chores like laundry and cleaning without being asked. During holidays and family gatherings, I felt grateful to be surrounded by love and laughter. Emma would often comment to relatives about how nice it was having me there, how much she enjoyed our daily conversations, and how worried she'd been about me living alone after losing Robert. I believed we had created a mutually beneficial arrangement where I received companionship during my grief while helping them financially during their lean years. But apparently, I was wrong about how Emma really felt about our living situation. The conversation I overheard would reveal feelings she'd been hiding for months, feelings that made me question everything I thought I knew about our relationship and my place in her household. I should mention something important about my background that becomes relevant later in the story. Before I retired, I spent 25 years working as a senior accountant for a large property management company. I understood rental agreements, lease terms, tenant rights, and property law better than most people. I also knew how to analyze financial situations and make strategic decisions about living arrangements and housing costs. Emma seemed genuinely forget that her mother had extensive experience in real estate and financial planning, not just from my professional background, but also from managing our own investment properties with Robert over the years. 3 months ago, I started noticing subtle changes in how Emma treated me.
The changes were small at first, barely noticeable, but they created an uncomfortable undercurrent in our daily interactions. She began responding to my comments with short, clipped answers instead of engaging in our usual conversations. When I offered to help with dinner preparation, she'd say she preferred doing it herself rather than accepting my assistance like she used to. The first incident that really bothered me happened during a family barbecue in their backyard. I was chatting with Emma's friend Lisa about my volunteer work at the Literacy Center when Emma interrupted our conversation. "Mom, Lisa doesn't need to hear about all your volunteer activities," she said with an edge in her voice that surprised me. I felt embarrassed and confused, especially since Lisa had seemed genuinely interested in hearing about my work with adult learners. A few weeks later, I noticed Emma started excluding me from certain household decisions. When they were planning to replace the kitchen appliances, something I would normally be consulted about since I was contributing to household expenses, Emma and David discussed options privately and made their choice without mentioning it to me. I only found out about the new refrigerator when it was delivered on a Tuesday morning while I was at my book club meeting. The pattern continued with other household matters. When they decided to switch internet providers, change their landscaping service, or update their home insurance policy, I learned about these decisions after they'd already been made. It felt like I was gradually being excluded from the life of a household I was financially supporting. Emma also started making comments about my daily routine that felt critical rather than caring. When I mentioned I was thinking about taking a photography class at the community college, she said, "At your age, wouldn't you rather focus on more practical activities?" When I bought new plants for the small garden area I'd created in the corner of their backyard, she commented that we really didn't need any more things to maintain around the house. The breaking point came during a conversation about my friend Dorothy, who had recently moved into a lovely assisted living community. Emma brought up Dorothy's move several times over the course of a week, each time commenting on how happy and active Dorothy seemed in her new environment. She'd mentioned how nice it was that Dorothy had so many organized activities, how much easier it must be for her children now that they didn't have to worry about her daily care, and how independent Dorothy felt in her own apartment. At first, I thought Emma was genuinely happy for Dorothy, but after the fifth or sixth comment about how wonderful assisted living could be for older adults, I started to wonder if she was trying to send me a message. The comments felt pointed and deliberate, especially when she'd make them right after I'd mentioned my own daily activities or plans. 2 weeks ago, I overheard a phone conversation that confirmed my growing suspicions about Emma's true feelings. It was a Thursday afternoon, and I was in my upstairs sitting area reading when I heard Emma talking on the phone in the kitchen directly below my room. The old house had thin floors, and sound carried easily between the levels. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but her voice was clear enough that I couldn't help but hear what she was saying. She was talking to her friend Rachel, someone I'd known since Emma was in college. I could hear the frustration in her voice as she complained about something, and initially I thought she might be having work problems or marriage issues. But then I heard my name, and I realized with a sinking heart that I was the source of her frustration. "Mom's been living here for 2 years now," Emma said, and her voice carried a tone of exhaustion I'd never heard her use when talking about me before. "And honestly, Rachel, I can't take it anymore. She's driving me insane with her constant presence. I never have any privacy in my own house, and David and I can't even have a normal conversation without her inserting herself into everything." I felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. I'd tried so hard to respect their privacy, to stay out of their way, to maintain boundaries while still being part of the household. Apparently, my efforts hadn't been enough. "The worst part is, she acts like she's doing us this huge favor by paying part of the expenses," Emma continued. "But the truth is, we can't afford to keep maintaining two households forever. She's got plenty of money to live somewhere else, but she's chosen to make our house her permanent residence instead of finding her own place." I couldn't breathe properly. Emma was talking about our living arrangement like I was some kind of burden she'd been forced to carry rather than a family member she'd invited to stay during my time of grief. She was also completely misrepresenting the financial arrangement we'd agreed upon. I wasn't paying part of the expenses out of charity. I was paying my fair share as an adult contributing member of the household. But Emma wasn't finished. "I wish she'd just move into assisted living already so David and I could have our privacy back," she said, and her voice took on a wistful quality that made my heart sink even further. Rachel must have said something about the cost of assisted living because Emma's next comment revealed even more about her true feelings. "Oh, she pays us money every month, but honestly, it's not worth the hassle of having her here all the time. I'd rather struggle financially and have our house back to ourselves. David feels the same way, but neither of us knows how to bring this up without seeming ungrateful or cruel."
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
I sat in my chair, stunned by what I was hearing. Emma was characterizing my monthly contribution as insufficient compensation for the burden of my presence. She was suggesting that money couldn't make up for the inconvenience of having me live in their home, even though I'd been nothing but respectful and helpful during my entire stay. The conversation continued, and Emma's complaints became more specific and hurtful. "She's always here, Rachel, always. When David and I want to watch a movie, she's in the living room. When we want to have friends over, we have to include her or feel guilty about excluding her. When we want to make changes to the house, we have to consider her opinions because she's paying for part of everything. It's like having a permanent house guest who never leaves." Each word felt like a knife to my heart. I'd thought I was being a considerate housemate, participating in family activities when invited and staying out of the way when appropriate. But apparently, Emma saw my presence as intrusive and my opinions as unwelcome interference in her household decisions. The final blow came when Emma said something that revealed the depth of her resentment. The truth is, I never thought this arrangement would last this long. When I first suggested she move in with us, I thought it would be temporary, maybe 6 months while she grieved and figured out her next steps. I never imagined she'd settle in permanently and act like this is her house too. I mean, technically she's a tenant paying rent, but she acts like she's an equal partner in household decisions. That comment stung more than anything else she'd said. Emma was characterizing me as a tenant rather than a family member, despite the fact that she'd presented the original invitation as a loving daughter caring for her grieving mother. She was also suggesting that my input on household decisions was inappropriate, even though I was contributing financially to those very decisions. Rachel must have asked about how to handle the situation because Emma's response revealed she'd been planning this conversation for some time. I think David and I need to have a serious talk with her about finding her own place. We've been enabling this situation by letting it continue for so long. She needs to understand that this was always meant to be temporary, and it's time for her to move on to a more appropriate living situation for someone her age.
The phrase, more appropriate living situation for someone her age, felt particularly insulting. I was 71 years old, not 91. I was healthy, active, and fully capable of independent living. I didn't need assisted living, I needed a home where I felt welcome and valued. But Emma saved the most hurtful comment for last. The worst part is, she's got so much money that she could afford a really nice place of her own, but she's choosing to stay here because it's cheaper and more convenient for her. She's essentially using us to subsidize her lifestyle while limiting our privacy and freedom in our own home. I couldn't listen to any more. I quietly stood up from my chair and went to my bedroom, closing the door softly behind me. I sat on the edge of my bed, trying to process what I'd just heard. My daughter, the woman I'd raised with love and sacrifice, the person I'd supported through college and career struggles, the child I'd comforted through every disappointment and celebrated with through every success, saw me as a burden and a user. Emma had completely mischaracterized our living arrangement and my motivations for staying. She'd painted me as someone taking advantage of their kindness, rather than a grieving widow who'd been invited to join their household during a difficult time. She'd reduced our relationship to a financial transaction and found even that transaction wanting. But what hurt most was realizing that Emma had been harboring these feelings for months, possibly years, while pretending to enjoy having me there. Every conversation we'd shared, every family dinner we'd enjoyed, every moment I thought we were building happy memories together had apparently been tainted by her resentment and frustration. That night, I barely slept. I kept replaying Emma's words in my mind, trying to understand how our relationship had deteriorated so dramatically without my realizing it. I thought about all the times I'd contributed to household expenses beyond my monthly payment, all the ways I'd tried to be helpful rather than burdensome, all the efforts I'd made to maintain my independence while still being part of their family. I also thought about Emma's comment that she and David couldn't afford to maintain two households forever. It was an interesting choice of words that revealed something important about how she viewed our arrangement. She wasn't seeing my monthly contribution as payment for my share of household expenses. She was seeing it as financial support they were providing to me, which explained why she felt burdened by the arrangement. But Emma was wrong about something crucial. I wasn't staying with them because it was cheaper or more convenient for me. I was staying because I believed we were building a loving, multi-generational family arrangement that benefited everyone involved. I believed that my presence brought companionship and support to their lives, just as their presence brought comfort to mine during my grief. Emma was also wrong about my financial situation and my understanding of housing markets. As someone who'd worked in property management for 25 years and owned rental properties with Robert, I understood real estate values, rental costs, and housing options better than she realized. I'd been paying attention to the local market, and I knew exactly what my options were if I decided to live independently again. The next morning, I made myself breakfast and sat at the kitchen table with my laptop, just as I used to do when I was working. Emma had already let for a client meeting, and David was at school, so I had the house to myself to think clearly about my situation. I started by researching current rental prices for one-bedroom apartments in nice areas of Riverside.
What I found was illuminating. A quality one-bedroom apartment in a good neighborhood with amenities suitable for someone my age was renting for between $2,200 and $2,800 per month. This was actually less than the $3,000 I was currently contributing to Emma and David's household expenses. Next, I looked at condominiums for sale in the area. There were several beautiful two-bedroom condos in gated communities with amenities like pools, fitness centers, and social activities that would be perfect for someone in my situation. The prices ranged from $350,000 to $450,000, well within my budget considering my current assets. I also researched the assisted living communities Emma had apparently been investigating. The nice facilities in the area did indeed cost between $4,000 and $5,500 per month, significantly more than independent living options. Emma had been right about my ability to afford assisted living,
but she'd been wrong to assume that was the most appropriate choice for someone in my situation. As I researched housing options, I realized something important. I had more choices and more financial freedom than Emma seemed to understand. I wasn't dependent on their household for affordable housing. I was choosing to live there because I believed it was a mutually beneficial family arrangement. Emma's comments had revealed that the arrangement was only beneficial for them financially, not emotionally or relationally. I spent the afternoon reviewing my financial situation in detail. My investment accounts had performed well over the past 2 years, and with the monthly household contributions I'd been making, I actually had more liquid assets now than when I'd first moved in with Emma and David. The sale of my San Diego house, combined with conservative investment strategies and the money I'd saved by sharing household expenses, had left me in excellent financial shape. By evening, I'd reached a decision that surprised me with its clarity. I was going to find my own place and move out of Emma and David's house. But I wasn't going to tell them about my decision right away. First, I wanted to understand the full scope of their feelings about our living arrangement, and I wanted to make sure I found the perfect new home for myself. Emma was wrong about many things, but she was right about one crucial point. We couldn't afford to maintain 2 households forever, emotionally speaking. The resentment and frustration she'd been harboring was poisoning our relationship, and continuing the current arrangement would only make things worse over time. But Emma was about to learn that her understanding of our financial arrangement had been completely backwards. She thought I was dependent on them for affordable housing, when the truth was that they'd been dependent on my contribution to maintain their mortgage payments and household expenses. She thought I was using them to subsidize my lifestyle when I'd actually been subsidizing theirs. Most importantly, Emma had forgotten that her mother wasn't just someone who'd worked as an accountant for 25 years. I was someone who understood real estate markets, rental agreements, and financial planning better than most people. I knew how to analyze housing costs, evaluate neighborhood amenities, and make strategic decisions about living arrangements. Emma had underestimated my financial resources, my independence, and my business acumen. She was about to discover that the woman she'd been treating as a burdensome tenant was actually the person whose monthly contribution had been keeping their household budget afloat for the past 2 years. Over the next few days, I quietly began the process of finding my new home. I scheduled appointments with real estate agents, viewed several properties, and started planning my transition to independent living. Emma and David continued their normal routines, apparently unaware that I'd overheard Emma's conversation or that I was making plans to leave. I watched their interactions with me more carefully now, noticing things I'd missed before. Emma's smile seemed forced, her conversation felt stilted, and she was clearly making an effort to be patient with me rather than genuinely enjoying my company. David seemed more natural in his interactions, but I noticed he often deferred to Emma when it came to household decisions involving me. The irony wasn't lost on me. For 2 years, I'd been contributing to their household expenses out of love and gratitude, believing we were creating a beautiful family arrangement that honored Robert's memory while supporting Emma and David during their financial struggles. But Emma had been counting the days until she could ask me to leave. And now I was going to grant her wish in a way she never expected. What Emma didn't realize was that when I moved out, I wouldn't just be taking my personal belongings with me. I'd also be taking my $3,000 monthly contribution, leaving them to cover the full cost of their mortgage and household expenses on their teacher and freelancer salaries. They'd get their privacy back, just as Emma wanted, but they'd also get the financial reality of maintaining their household without my help. As I continued my housing search, I felt a mixture of sadness and anticipation. I was sad to leave what I thought was a loving family arrangement, but I was also excited about the prospect of creating a new home where I'd be valued and appreciated rather than merely tolerated. At 71 years old, I was about to discover that starting over could be an adventure rather than a burden. The following Monday morning, I decided to take action on my housing search in earnest. Emma had left early for a design consultation, and David was already at school, giving me the perfect opportunity to make some important phone calls without interruption.
I started by contacting Patricia Williams, a real estate agent I had worked with years ago when Robert and I were managing our rental properties. Patricia had always been thorough and discreet, qualities I needed right now. Patricia, this is Margaret Chen. I don't know if you remember me, but we worked together about 8 years ago when my husband and I were buying investment properties. Of course I remember you, Margaret, she replied warmly. I was so sorry to hear about Robert's passing. How are you doing? I'm doing well, actually, and I'm ready to make a change.
I'm looking for a new home for myself, something that would suit an active woman in her 70s who values independence and quality. Patricia immediately understood what I was looking for. She suggested we meet that afternoon to discuss my preferences and budget, and she offered to show me several properties she thought might interest me. I agreed to meet her at 2 p.m., giving myself time to prepare a list of must-haves for my new home. After hanging up with Patricia, I called my financial advisor, Stephen Martinez, who had been managing my investment portfolio since Robert's death. Stephen, I'm considering purchasing a new home, and I want to understand my current financial position and options for financing. Margaret, I'm glad to hear you're thinking about this step. Let me pull up your accounts and give you a complete picture. The numbers Stephen shared with me were even better than I'd calculated on my own. My investment portfolio had grown to nearly $950,000, and I had an additional $180,000 in savings and money market accounts. The monthly household contributions I'd been making to Emma and David had actually helped my financial position by keeping my living expenses lower than they would have been if I'd been maintaining my own household all along. Stephen explained that I could easily afford to purchase a home in the $400,000 to $500,000 range without touching my investment principal. The income from my investments, combined with Robert's pension benefits and my own small pension from the property management company, would more than cover the expenses of independent living. In fact, Stephen suggested that owning my own home again might be better for my long-term financial health than continuing to pay rent to anyone, even family members. Armed with this financial confidence, I spent the morning creating a detailed list of what I wanted in my new home. I wanted a modern condominium or townhouse in a well-maintained community with amenities that would support an active lifestyle. I preferred 2 bedrooms, so I could have a guest room for visitors, and I wanted a den or office space where I could manage my finances and pursue my hobbies. A nice kitchen was important since I enjoyed cooking, and I wanted outdoor space where I could garden. Location-wise, I wanted to stay in the Riverside area to maintain my friendships and volunteer commitments, but I wanted to be far enough from Emma and David's neighborhood to ensure we all had appropriate space and privacy. I also wanted to be near shopping, medical facilities, and cultural activities that would enrich my daily life. When I met Patricia that afternoon, she was impressed by how thoroughly I'd thought through my requirements. She had 3 properties to show me that day, each representing a different style of community living that might appeal to someone in my situation. The first property was a 2-bedroom condominium in a gated community called Sunset Gardens. The community was designed specifically for active adults over 55, with a beautiful clubhouse, fitness center, swimming pool, and organized social activities. The condo itself was spacious and modern, with granite countertops, hardwood floors, and a large balcony overlooking a golf course. The monthly HOA fees included exterior maintenance, landscaping, security, and access to all community amenities. I loved the sense of community at Sunset Gardens, but something about the atmosphere felt too structured for my taste. There were scheduled activities every day, from water aerobics to bridge tournaments. And while I appreciated having options, I didn't want my social life to be organized by a community calendar. The second property was a townhouse in a mixed-age community called Riverside Meadows. This development had residents ranging from young professionals to retirees, creating a more diverse and dynamic environment. The townhouse had 3 levels, with the main living areas on the ground floor,
2 bedrooms upstairs, and a finished basement that could serve as an office or hobby room. It also had a small private patio and a 2-car garage. I liked the townhouse layout and the diversity of the community, but the 3 levels felt like more space than I needed, and I worried about navigating stairs as I got older. The community amenities were limited to a small pool and tennis court, which meant I'd need to look elsewhere for fitness and social opportunities. The third property was perfect. It was a 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom condominium in a community called Heritage Hills, designed for residents age 50 and older, but without the intensive activity programming of some senior communities. The condo was on the second floor of a 3-story building with elevator access, and it had a beautiful view of the community gardens and walking trails. The interior was exactly what I'd been hoping for. The kitchen had been recently renovated with quartz countertops and stainless steel appliances. The master bedroom was spacious with a walk-in closet and ensuite bathroom. The second bedroom would make a perfect guest room or office, and there was a separate den that could serve as a reading room or hobby space. The living and dining areas were open and bright, with large windows and a sliding door leading to a covered balcony. The Heritage Hills community offered the perfect balance of amenities and independence. There was a fitness center with modern equipment and fitness classes, a heated swimming pool, a library, and several social clubs that organized optional activities like book discussions, travel groups, and volunteer projects. The community also had walking trails, beautifully maintained gardens, and a small cafe where residents could gather informally. What impressed me most about Heritage Hills was the quality of the residents I met during the tour. They were active, engaged people who had chosen this community because it offered independence with convenient amenities, not because they needed assistance with daily living. These were people who traveled, volunteered, pursued hobbies, and maintained active social lives while enjoying the security and convenience of a well-managed community. The condominium was priced at $445,000, well within my budget, and the monthly HOA fees of $280 covered exterior maintenance, landscaping, community amenities, water, and trash service. Patricia explained that the seller was motivated to close quickly, which would work perfectly with my timeline. After seeing all 3 properties, I knew Heritage Hills was exactly what I wanted. I asked Patricia to prepare an offer that evening, and I scheduled a second viewing for the following day so I could take measurements and start planning how my furniture would fit in the space. That evening, I sat in my room at Emma and David's house, looking through the photos Patricia had taken of the Heritage Hills condo, and feeling excited about the prospect of creating a new home for myself. For the first time since Robert's death, I was planning a future that felt entirely my own, not shaped by grief or family obligations or other people's expectations. I also spent that evening researching the practical aspects of my move. I looked into moving companies, utility transfer procedures, and the timeline for closing on a real estate purchase. Having worked in property management, I was familiar with most of these processes, but I wanted to make sure I planned everything carefully to ensure a smooth transition.
The next morning, I returned to Heritage Hills for my second viewing. This time, I brought a measuring tape and a notebook to record the dimensions of each room. I also spent more time exploring the community amenities and talking with residents I encountered during my visit. Everyone I met was friendly and welcoming. I chatted with Eleanor, a 68-year-old retired teacher who'd moved to Heritage Hills 3 years earlier after her divorce. She told me she'd initially worried about living in a community with organized activities, but she'd found the perfect balance of social opportunities and privacy. She participated in the book club and the travel group, but ignored the other activities that didn't interest her. I also met Frank and Maria, a couple in their mid-70s who'd moved to Heritage Hills from a large house they could no longer maintain. They told me they should have made the move years earlier because they were much happier in a community where they could pursue their interests without worrying about home maintenance and yard work. After my second visit, I was completely confident in my decision. I called Patricia and asked her to submit an offer of $435,000, which was $10,000 below the asking price, but still a strong offer in the current market. Patricia thought the seller would likely accept, especially since I was offering a quick closing with no financing contingencies. While Patricia handled the offer negotiations, I began the delicate process of planning my departure from Emma and David's house. I needed to be strategic about timing and communication to ensure the transition went smoothly for everyone involved. First, I called my attorney, James Morrison, who had handled Robert's estate and helped me with various legal matters over the years. James, I'm planning to move out of my daughter's house and into my own place. I want to make sure I handle this properly from a legal standpoint, especially regarding the financial arrangements we've had in place. James asked me to explain the current living arrangement and my monthly contribution to their household expenses. After I described the situation, he confirmed what I had already suspected from my property management experience. Since I didn't have a formal lease agreement and was paying month to month, I was legally required to give 30 days written notice before terminating the arrangement. However, James also pointed out something I hadn't considered. Because I'd been contributing to household expenses rather than paying rent for a specific space, and because Emma and David had likely been using my contribution to help cover their mortgage payments, my departure could create a significant financial hardship for them if they weren't prepared for the change. From a family perspective, James suggested I consider giving them more than the legally required 30 days notice so they could adjust their budget accordingly. From a practical standpoint, he recommended documenting our current arrangement and my reasons for leaving to protect myself if there were any disputes later. That afternoon, Patricia called with good news. The seller had accepted my offer of $435,000, and we could close in 3 weeks if I was ready to move that quickly. I told her to proceed with the purchase, and I scheduled inspections and finalized my financing arrangements. With the purchase moving forward, I began the process of preparing for my departure from Emma and David's house. I needed to be methodical about this transition because I wanted to leave on good terms while also protecting my own interests. I started by creating an inventory of all my belongings and deciding what I would take to my new home versus what I might sell or donate. Since the Heritage Hills condo was smaller than the master suite I currently occupied, I'd need to be selective about furniture and personal items. I also began quietly researching moving companies and scheduling estimates for packing and transportation services. I wanted to have everything arranged so that once I announced my departure, I could move quickly and efficiently without prolonging an uncomfortable situation. Most importantly, I spent time thinking about how to communicate my decision to Emma and David. I wanted to be honest about my reasons for leaving without being accusatory or hurtful. I also wanted to give them adequate time to adjust their finances, even though Emma's comments had made it clear that she wanted me to leave. Over the next week, while my real estate purchase moved through inspections and financing approvals, I continued observing Emma and David's behavior toward me. Now that I knew how Emma really felt about our living arrangement, I noticed things I'd missed before. Emma seemed to be making more of an effort to include me in conversations and activities, but her efforts felt forced and uncomfortable. She'd ask about my day with exaggerated interest, invite me to watch television shows I'd never expressed interest in, and make comments about how nice it was having me around. The contrast between her public behavior and her private complaints to Rachel was stark and unsettling. David seemed more genuine in his interactions, but I noticed he often looked tired and stressed. I wondered if Emma had been sharing her frustrations about my presence with him, creating tension in their marriage that he was trying to manage diplomatically. One evening, I overheard part of another phone conversation between Emma and David after he returned home from school. They were in their bedroom, and I could hear their voices through the thin walls, though not as clearly as I'd heard Emma's earlier conversation with Rachel. Emma was apparently updating David on her plans to talk with me about finding my own place, and David was expressing concerns about the financial impact of my departure. I couldn't make out all the details, but I heard enough to understand that David was worried about how they'd cover their expenses without my monthly contribution. This conversation confirmed what I'd already suspected from my property management experience. Since Emma wanted me to leave for emotional reasons, David was more focused on the practical implications of losing my financial support. Neither of them seemed to realize that I was already planning to grant Emma's wish in a timeline that worked better for me than for them. 10 days after making my offer on the Heritage Hills condo, I received confirmation that all inspections had been completed successfully and my financing was approved. Patricia scheduled the closing for the following Wednesday, which meant I'd be a homeowner again in less than a week. That evening, I decided it was time to have the conversation with Emma and David about my plans. I'd prepared what I wanted to say, and I'd gathered all the documentation I might need to explain my decision and the timeline for my departure. After dinner, I asked Emma and David if we could sit down together in the living room to discuss something important. They both looked immediately concerned, probably expecting me to share bad news about my health or finances. Emma, David, I began, taking a brave breath and looking at both of them directly.
I've made a decision that I think will be best for all of us. I've purchased a condominium in a community called Heritage Hills, and I'll be moving out next week. The silence that followed was deafening. Emma's face went through a series of expressions, from shock to confusion to what looked like panic. David's mouth dropped open, and he stared at me like I'd just announced I was moving to another planet. "Mom, what are you talking about?" Emma finally managed to say. "You bought a condo? When? Why? I thought you were happy here with us." "I've been very happy here, and I'm grateful for the love and support you've both shown me during my grief," I replied carefully. "But I've realized it's time for me to establish my own independent household again. I'm healthy, active, and financially capable of living on my own, and I think it would be best for everyone if I had my own space." "But we don't want you to leave," David said, and he seemed genuinely distressed by my announcement. "This is your home too. We love having you here." I appreciated David's response, but I'd heard Emma's real feelings, and I knew this reaction was more about financial concerns than emotional attachment to my presence. Emma was still processing my announcement. "Mom, this is so sudden. We had no idea you were even thinking about moving out. Did we do something wrong? Did something happen that made you feel unwelcome?" Her questions sounded sincere, and for a moment I felt tempted to be completely honest about the conversation I'd overheard. But I decided that confronting her directly about her complaints to Rachel would only create hurt feelings and defensive arguments that wouldn't benefit anyone. "Nothing happened, Emma. You've both been wonderful hosts, and I've enjoyed living here more than I can express. But I've been thinking about this decision for a while, and I realized that continuing to live in someone else's home, even family, isn't the right long-term solution for me." David jumped in with practical concerns. "But Mom," he said, using the name he'd called me since marrying Emma, "this must have cost a fortune. Are you sure you can afford to buy a place and maintain it on your own? We've been helping you save money by sharing expenses here." I smiled at his concern, which seemed more genuine than Emma's shock. "David, I appreciate your worry about my finances, but I'm in very good financial shape. The condominium I purchased is well within my budget, and the monthly expenses will actually be lower than what I've been contributing here." That comment seemed to register with both of them, and I saw Emma's expression shift as she began calculating the financial implications of my departure. "How much lower?" Emma asked, and her voice had a slightly sharp edge that hadn't been there moments before. "The total monthly cost of living in my new home, including HOA fees, utilities, and property taxes, will be about $2,400, which is $600 less than the $3,000 I've been contributing here each month." The mathematics of my departure were clearly starting to sink in for both of them. They were about to lose $3,000 in monthly income, while I was about to reduce my housing costs by $600 per month. The financial impact would be significantly positive for me and significantly negative for them. David looked stricken. "Mom, we never expected you to move out. How are we going to manage the mortgage and expenses without your contribution?" His question was exactly what I'd expected, and it confirmed that my monthly payments had become integrated into their household budget rather than being treated as temporary assistance. David, when I first moved in here, you and Emma were managing all these expenses on your own, I said gently. I assume you can return to that arrangement, though I understand it might require some budget adjustments. Emma finally found her voice again. Mom, we can't afford this house without your help. You know our situation. David's teacher salary and my freelance income barely cover our basic expenses, and we've been using your contribution to pay for improvements and savings. Her admission revealed something important. Not only had they been using my monthly contribution to cover basic household expenses, but they'd also been using it to fund discretionary spending and savings goals. My financial support had allowed them to live beyond their means rather than simply helping them make ends meet. I understand this creates challenges for you, I said, maintaining a calm and sympathetic tone. But I think it's important for all of us to establish appropriate boundaries and independence.
You'll have 30 days to adjust your budget, which should give you time to make any necessary changes. 30 days? Emma repeated, and now her voice was rising with panic. Mom, you can't just give us 30 days notice like we're landlords. We're your family. This is incredibly unfair to spring this on us with so little warning. I felt a flash of anger at her characterization of my decision as unfair, especially since I knew she had been wishing I would leave for months, but I managed to keep my voice steady and reasonable. Emma, 30 days is actually more notice than I'm legally required to give for a month-to-month arrangement, and it's the same notice period that would apply in any rental situation. I'm trying to be fair to everyone involved while also taking care of my own needs. David was still focused on the financial implications. Is there any way you'd consider staying longer? Maybe just until we can figure out our budget situation? Or could you help us transition gradually by reducing your contributions slowly over several months instead of stopping all at once? I understood his desperation, but I also knew that prolonging the arrangement would only make the eventual separation more difficult for everyone involved. David, I appreciate your concern, but I've already committed to purchasing the condominium, and I'm excited about starting this new chapter of my life. I think a clean break will be better for everyone than drawing out the transition. Emma stood up abruptly and began pacing around the living room. This is unbelievable, she said, and her voice was getting louder. Mom, you know we can't afford this house without your help. You're essentially forcing us to sell our home and move somewhere cheaper. Her reaction was starting to reveal the entitled attitude I'd heard in her conversation with Rachel, and I felt my patience beginning to wear thin. Emma, I'm not forcing you to do anything. I'm making a decision about my own living situation that I believe is best for everyone involved. You and David are adults who were managing this household before I moved in, and I'm confident you'll find a way to manage it again. But we'll have to give up everything we've worked for, she said, and tears were starting to form in her eyes. The house, our savings goals, maybe even David's graduate school plans. Your decision affects our entire future. I felt sorry for their disappointment, but I also felt frustrated by Emma's assumption that my financial support should be permanent and unconditional. Emma, when I first moved in here, we agreed this would be a temporary arrangement to help me through my grief. It was never intended to be a permanent financial subsidy for your household expenses. That statement seemed to catch her off guard, and she stopped pacing to stare at me. You said it was temporary? She asked. I thought you wanted to live here permanently. You never said anything about moving out. I looked at both of them carefully before responding. Emma, you invited me to stay here temporarily while I was grieving. Over time, the arrangement became comfortable for everyone, but it was never meant to be permanent. I always planned to eventually establish my own household again. David was shaking his head. But you seemed so settled here. You decorated your room, you got involved in household decisions, you acted like this was your permanent home. I had acted like this was my home because Emma and David had encouraged me to do so. They told me to make myself comfortable, to treat their house like my own, to participate in family decisions. Now they were suggesting that my comfort and involvement had been inappropriate or presumptuous. I've enjoyed being part of your household, and I've tried to be a helpful and considerate family member.
but living with adult children indefinitely isn't the right solution for someone my age who is capable of independent living. Emma sat back down heavily and put her head in her hands. I can't believe this is happening. Just when we thought we had our finances stable, everything is falling apart again. Her comment revealed the extent to which they'd become dependent on my financial support. Rather than treating my support as temporary assistance, they'd incorporated it into their long-term financial planning. Emma, I said gently, I understand this is disappointing, but you'll both be fine. You managed before I moved in, and you'll manage again. Sometimes challenging situations lead to creative solutions and new opportunities. David was still trying to negotiate. Mom, what if we restructured the arrangement somehow?
Maybe you could keep a room here as your primary residence, but also have the condo as a weekend place? Or maybe you could move out but still contribute something to help us transition. His suggestions revealed how difficult it was for them to accept losing my financial support entirely. They were grasping for any arrangement that would allow them to maintain some access to my money. David, I appreciate your creativity, but I think clean boundaries will be healthier for everyone. I want to establish my own independent household, and you and Emma need to learn to manage your finances without relying on my contribution. Emma looked up at me with an expression I'd never seen before. It was a mixture of anger, desperation, and something that looked almost like betrayal. Mom, she said slowly, I can't help feeling like you're abandoning us when we need you most. We took you in when you were grieving and alone, and now you're leaving us in financial crisis. Her characterization of my departure as abandonment stung, especially since I knew how eager she'd been for me to leave. But it also revealed how differently we'd been viewing our living arrangement all along. Emma, you didn't take me in out of charity. I've been paying my fair share of household expenses, plus contributing to improvements and extras beyond my basic living costs. This has been a mutually beneficial arrangement, not a favor you've been doing for me. That's not how we saw it, David said quietly. We saw it as helping family during a difficult time. And I've appreciated that help more than you know. But I'm no longer in crisis, and I'm ready to resume independent living. I think that's healthy for everyone involved. We talked for another hour, covering the practical details of my departure and the timeline for transferring utilities and handling my belongings. Emma and David continued to express shock and disappointment, but they gradually began accepting that my decision was final. As the conversation wound down, Emma asked one more question that revealed she still didn't fully understand my motivations. Mom, are you sure this is what you really want? Living alone again after having family around you every day? Won't you be lonely? I looked at my daughter and realized she genuinely didn't understand that loneliness wasn't about being physically alone. I'd been feeling increasingly isolated in their household as I recognized that my presence was more tolerated than welcomed. Emma, I won't be alone. I'll be independent. There's a big difference. And at my age, independence is more valuable than convenience. That night I lay in bed feeling a mixture of relief and sadness. Relief that I'd finally announced my decision and could move forward with my plans openly. Sadness that my relationship with Emma had apparently been so different from what I'd believed it to be. But mostly I felt excited about the future for the first time since Robert's death. In less than a week, I'd have my own home again, my own space to arrange as I pleased, my own daily routine to establish without considering other people's preferences or schedules. Emma and David would figure out their financial situation just as they'd managed before I moved in with them. And I would discover what it meant to be an independent woman in her 70s, creating a life that honored both my past with Robert and my future as a single person. The next few days passed in a whirlwind of activity as I finalized the details of my purchase and my departure from Emma and David's house. My decision had been made, my new home was waiting, and my new life was about to begin. The closing on my Heritage Hills condominium went smoothly the following Wednesday morning. I sat at the conference table in the title company office, signing document after document with a sense of accomplishment I hadn't felt in years. When the final papers were signed and the keys were placed in my hand, I felt like I was reclaiming not just a home, but my entire identity as an independent woman. Patricia congratulated me on my purchase and handed me a welcome packet from the Heritage Hills Community Management. As I walked out of the title office, I called the moving company to confirm they would arrive at Emma and David's house the next morning at 8 a.m. to begin packing my belongings. That evening at dinner, the atmosphere in Emma and David's house was tense and uncomfortable. We made polite conversation about mundane topics, but the weight of my impending departure hung over everything. Emma had been unusually quiet since our conversation about my move, and David seemed to be trying too hard to act normal. After dinner, Emma finally broke the uncomfortable silence. "Mom, I've been thinking about everything, and I need to ask you something directly. Is there anything we did that made you want to leave? Any way we made you feel unwelcome?" I looked at my daughter across the kitchen table, considering how to respond honestly without being cruel. Part of me wanted to tell her about the conversation I had overheard, to let her know that I understood her true feelings about my presence. But another part of me recognized that confronting her directly would only lead to hurt feelings and defensiveness that wouldn't benefit anyone. "Emma, you and David have been gracious hosts, and I've felt welcome in your home. This decision isn't about anything you did wrong."
It's about what's right for me at this stage of my life. But it feels so sudden, she persisted. Like one day you were content living here, and the next day you were buying the condo. There must have been something that triggered this decision. Sometimes the timing of major decisions seems sudden from the outside, even when the person making them has been considering the choice for a while, I said carefully. I've been thinking about my long-term living situation since before I moved in here. This opportunity at Heritage Hills felt like the right time to make a change. David joined the conversation with practical concerns that seemed more genuine than Emma's emotional appeals. "Mom, I'm worried about how you'll manage living alone again. What if you get sick? What if there's an emergency? At least here we could keep an eye on you and make sure you are okay." I appreciated David's concern, but I also recognized that his worry revealed assumptions about my capabilities that weren't necessarily accurate. "David, I'm 71 years old, not 91. I'm healthy, active, and mentally sharp. Heritage Hills has security staff on duty 24 hours a day, and I'll have neighbors nearby if I ever need assistance. I'll probably be safer there than I would be in a traditional neighborhood." Emma tried a different approach. "What about our family time together? I've gotten used to having you here for dinners and conversations. I'll miss seeing you every day." Her comments about missing our daily interactions felt hollow, given what I'd heard her tell Rachel about my constant presence being intrusive and unwelcome. But I responded as if I believed her sentiment was sincere. "Emma, moving out doesn't mean we won't see each other regularly. You and David are always welcome to visit me at Heritage Hills, and I'd love to have you over for dinner once I'm settled. We can maintain our relationship without living in the same house." The next morning, the moving crew arrived promptly at 8 a.m. I'd hired a full-service moving company that would pack my belongings, transport them to my new home, and unpack everything according to my instructions. Having managed moves for rental properties during my working years, I knew the value of hiring professionals who could handle the entire process efficiently. Emma and David both seemed shocked by how organized and comprehensive my moving preparations were. I had detailed inventories of everything being moved, floor plans of my new condo showing where each piece of furniture should be placed, and specific instructions for the movers about fragile items and special handling requirements. As the movers systematically packed my clothing, furniture, books, and personal items, Emma wandered through the house looking displaced and confused. She kept making comments about how empty the rooms would look without my things, how quiet the house would be without my daily presence. David helped by carrying smaller items to the moving truck and asking practical questions about my new address and contact information. He seemed to be handling my departure better than Emma, perhaps because he was focusing on logistics rather than emotions. By 2 p.m., everything was packed and loaded onto the moving truck. I walked through the master suite one final time, checking drawers and closets to make sure nothing had been forgotten. The rooms that had been my home for 2 years now looked impersonal and empty, ready for Emma and David to reclaim the space for whatever purpose they chose.
I hugged both Emma and David goodbye in a driveway, promising to call once I was settled and inviting them to visit soon. Emma was crying, though I suspected her tears were more about financial anxiety than emotional loss. David seemed genuinely sad to see me go, and his farewell felt more authentic than Emma's dramatic display of grief. The drive to Heritage Hills took only 20 minutes, but it felt like I was traveling to a completely different world. As I pulled through the community gates and drove along the tree-lined streets toward my new building, I felt a sense of excitement and possibility that I hadn't experienced since before Robert's death. The movers were already unloading furniture when I arrived at my new home. I spent the afternoon directing placement of furniture and beginning the process of unpacking boxes. The condo felt spacious and bright, with afternoon sunlight streaming through the large windows and creating warm, welcoming spaces throughout. By evening, I had my bedroom set up with fresh linens, my kitchen organized with essential items, and my living room arranged with comfortable seating and familiar decorations. For the first time in 2 years, I was surrounded by my own things in my own space, able to arrange everything exactly as I preferred without considering other people's opinions or needs. I made myself a simple dinner and ate it on my balcony, watching the sunset over the community gardens and feeling profoundly peaceful. The silence wasn't lonely, it was liberating. I could read, watch television, listen to music, or simply sit quietly without wondering if I was intruding on someone else's space or activities. Over the next few days, I continued unpacking and organizing my new home while exploring the Heritage Hills community amenities. I visited the fitness center and signed up for a yoga class. I checked out books from the community library and attended a newcomer's coffee, where I met several friendly neighbors who welcomed me warmly. Eleanor, the retired teacher I'd met during my initial visit, invited me to join the book club, which met every other Tuesday evening in the community clubhouse. Frank and Maria introduced me to other residents who shared my interests in gardening and travel. Within a week, I had a social calendar that was more active and engaging than anything I had experienced while living with Emma and David.
The most surprising discovery was how much I enjoyed the independence of managing my own household again. I could grocery shop for exactly what I wanted to eat, cook meals that suited my preferences, and establish daily routines that reflected my natural rhythms rather than accommodating other people's schedules. I also found myself sleeping better than I had in months, without the underlying tension of wondering whether my presence was welcome or burdensome. I felt relaxed and at peace in a way I hadn't realized I'd been missing. 10 days after my move, Emma called for the first time since I'd left. Her voice sounded strained and tired when I answered the phone. "Hi, Mom. How are you settling in?" she asked, but her tone suggested she had more pressing concerns than my adjustment to independent living. "I'm doing wonderfully, Emma. The condo is perfect, and I'm already feeling at home in the community. How are you and David managing?" There was a long pause before she answered. "We're struggling, Mom. We really underestimated how much your monthly contribution was helping us cover our expenses. We've been looking at our budget, and we can't afford to stay in this house without your help." I felt a mixture of sympathy and vindication. Sympathy because I didn't want Emma and David to experience genuine financial hardship. Vindication because her admission confirmed that they'd been more dependent on my financial support than they'd been willing to acknowledge. "What are your options?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral and supportive. "We're going to have to sell the house and find something cheaper, or maybe rent for a while until we can improve our income situation. David is looking into tutoring opportunities to bring in extra money, and I'm trying to find more freelance clients. But it's going to take time to increase our earnings enough to cover what we were getting from you." Her explanation revealed the extent to which my monthly contribution had allowed them to live beyond their means. Instead of treating my financial support as temporary assistance that would eventually end, they'd incorporated it into their baseline budget and made spending decisions based on that inflated income level. "I'm sorry you're facing these challenges, Emma. Financial adjustments are never easy, but I'm confident you'll find solutions that work for your situation."
She was quiet for a moment before asking the question I'd been expecting. Mom, is there any possibility you'd consider helping us transition gradually? Maybe contributing something smaller for a few months while we adjust our budget? Her request revealed that she still hadn't fully accepted the end of my financial support. She was hoping to negotiate some continued assistance rather than taking full responsibility for their household expenses. Emma, I understand this transition is difficult, but I think a clean break is healthier for everyone involved. You and David are capable adults, and I have confidence in your ability to manage your finances independently. Another pause, then a more direct appeal. But Mom, we're going to lose our home, the house we've worked so hard to afford. Doesn't that matter to you? Of course it matters to me, Emma. I don't want you to experience financial stress. But I also can't continue indefinitely subsidizing a lifestyle you can't afford on your own income. Sometimes difficult situations force us to make changes that ultimately lead to better outcomes. Her voice took on an edge of frustration that reminded me of the tone I'd heard in her conversation with Rachel. Mom, you have plenty of money. Helping us for a few more months wouldn't hurt you financially, but it would make a huge difference for us. Her comment revealed the entitled attitude that had apparently been developing during the time I lived with them. She seemed to believe that my financial resources created an obligation to continue supporting them regardless of my own preferences or boundaries. Emma, my financial situation is not the issue here. The issue is that continuing to subsidize your household expenses indefinitely wouldn't be healthy for any of us. You need to learn to live within your means, and I need to use my resources in ways that align with my own goals and values. What goals and values, she asked, and her voice was rising with emotion. What's more important than helping your family when they need it? Her question struck me as particularly ironic, given that she'd been complaining to Rachel about my presence while accepting my financial support. But I managed to keep my response calm and reasonable. Emma, I've been helping my family for 2 years by contributing to your household expenses and covering additional costs for improvements and emergencies. Now, I'm choosing to invest in my own independence and well-being. Both are valid ways to use my resources.
I could hear her crying softly on the other end of the line. Mom, I feel like you're punishing us for something, but I don't understand what we did wrong. Her perception that my independence was somehow punishment for their behavior revealed how fundamentally different our understanding of the situation had been all along. She'd apparently expected my financial support to continue indefinitely, while I'd always viewed it as temporary assistance during my grief and their financial struggles. Emma, I'm not punishing anyone. I'm making decisions about my own life that I believe are best for everyone involved. Sometimes what feels like rejection is actually healthy boundary setting. We ended the conversation with mutual expressions of love and promises to stay in touch. But I could tell Emma remained upset and confused by my decision to prioritize my own independence over their financial convenience. 3 weeks later, David called to let me know they'd listed their house for sale and were looking at smaller rental properties they could afford on their combined income. He seemed to have accepted the situation more gracefully than Emma, and he spoke about the change as an opportunity to simplify their lives and reduce their financial stress. Mom, he said, I want you to know that we understand why you made the decision you did. It's been hard to adjust, but we're learning to manage our money more carefully, and we're actually finding some benefits to having a smaller budget. It's forcing us to be more intentional about our spending and our goals. I appreciated David's mature response to their changed circumstances. His ability to find positive aspects in their financial adjustment suggested that he was learning valuable lessons about budgeting and self-reliance that would serve them well in the long run. Emma has been having a harder time with the changes, David continued. She feels like you chose your own comfort over our family's stability. I've tried to help her understand your perspective, but she's still pretty hurt and confused. I'm sorry Emma is struggling with this transition, I said. I hope she'll eventually understand that independence and family loyalty aren't mutually exclusive. I can love and support my family while still maintaining appropriate boundaries and making decisions that are healthy for everyone involved. 6 months after my move to Heritage Hills, I hosted my first dinner party in my new home. I invited Eleanor, Frank, and Maria, and 2 other neighbors I'd become friendly with through various community activities.
We had a wonderful evening of good food, interesting conversation, and genuine laughter. As I cleaned up after my guests left, I reflected on how much my life had changed since leaving Emma and David's house. I was more socially active, more physically active, and more emotionally fulfilled than I'd been in years. The independence I'd reclaimed by moving out had allowed me to rediscover interests and relationships that had been dormant during my time as a grieving widow living in someone else's household. I also thought about the financial implications of my decision. The monthly cost of living in my own home was indeed lower than what I'd been contributing to Emma and David's household, which meant I was saving money while gaining independence. My investment portfolio continued to grow, and I was able to pursue activities and interests that enriched my life without worrying about how my choices affected other people's budgets or schedules. Most importantly, I'd learned that at 71 years old, I still had the power to make major life changes that honored my own needs and values. I didn't have to accept living situations that made me feel unwelcome or financial arrangements that didn't serve my best interests, even when those situations involved family members I loved. Emma and David eventually found a rental house in a more affordable neighborhood, and David increased his income by taking on additional tutoring work. Emma gradually increased her freelance client base and found more consistent work with a local marketing agency. They learned to live within their means and discovered that their reduced expenses actually created less financial stress than trying to maintain a lifestyle they couldn't afford without my assistance. Our relationship slowly healed over time, though it took months for Emma to fully understand that my decision to live independently wasn't a rejection of our family bond. Eventually, she acknowledged that my financial support had created an unhealthy dependency that prevented them from developing their own financial resilience. As I settled into my new life at Heritage Hills, I realized that Emma had been right about one thing in her conversation with Rachel. We couldn't afford to maintain two households forever, emotionally speaking. The difference was that Emma thought I was the one who couldn't afford independence, when the truth was that they couldn't afford to keep depending on my financial support. My decision to reclaim my independence had been the right choice for everyone involved, even though it had initially created challenges for Emma and David. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for family members is to stop enabling their dependency and allow them to develop their own strength and resilience. At 71 years old, I discovered that starting over could be an adventure rather than a burden, and that independence was indeed more valuable than convenience. I'd also learned that financial resources are most powerful when they're used to create genuine freedom and autonomy rather than to maintain relationships or situations that don't serve everyone's best interests. Emma had been wrong about my business acumen, my independence, and my willingness to make difficult decisions. But she'd been absolutely right about one crucial point. We couldn't afford two households forever. Now, they had one household they could actually afford, and I had the independence and dignity I had been missing. It turned out to be exactly the outcome everyone needed, even if it wasn't the one Emma had originally wanted. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.